The warning lights flashed red across the massive chamber as Ambassador Kethvar stepped forward to address the Galactic Council. His blue-scaled hands shook slightly as he held the datapad containing information that would change everything. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of translation devices worn by representatives from 47 different worlds. Kethvar cleared his throat and began speaking in his native tongue. The words automatically converted into dozens of languages for the assembled delegates. The news he carried was darker than anything the galaxy had faced in 3,000 years. Deep space monitoring stations at the edge of known space had detected movement in the void between galaxies. Something ancient and terrible had awakened. Fellow representatives of the Galactic Council, Kethvar announced, his voice echoing through the vast dome structure. Our worst fears have been confirmed. The void swarm has returned. A collective gasp rose from the assembled delegates. Some species had only heard of the void swarm in ancient legends passed down through generations. Others, like the Zilani, still carried genetic memories of the last time these creatures had swept through inhabited space. That was over 5,000 years ago, when entire civilizations had vanished overnight, consumed by an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every victory. High Chancellor Mordan, a towering figure encased in ceremonial armor that reflected the lights of 100 worlds, raised his primary appendage for silence. The Chancellor's species, the Korthax, were known for their military prowess and had served as peacekeepers for the galaxy for over 2 millennia. If anyone could organize a defense against this ancient threat, it would be Mordan. Show us the evidence, Mordan commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The main display screen activated, showing grainy images captured by long-range sensors. What appeared on screen defied easy description. The Void Swarm ships were not constructed like normal vessels. Instead, they seemed to be living organisms, pulsing with organic rhythms while displaying technological capabilities that surpassed anything in the known galaxy. Each ship appeared to be growing, feeding on cosmic radiation and stellar matter as it moved through space. Kethvar manipulated the controls, zooming in on specific details that made several delegates recoil in horror. The ships were not just alive, they were actively consuming everything in their path. Asteroid fields disappeared into their bulk, while space debris was absorbed and converted into new ship components. Most disturbing of all, the creatures appeared to be learning and adapting with each encounter. Our projections indicate they will reach the outer colonies within 4 months, Kethvar continued, his voice growing more strained. Current fleet deployments suggest we cannot match their numbers or their adaptive capabilities. Traditional energy weapons appear to be ineffective after initial contact. They learn to absorb and redirect our own technology against us. The chamber erupted in concerned chatter as delegates discussed the implications with their advisors. Some species immediately began calculating evacuation routes for their homeworlds, while others demanded more information about possible defensive strategies. The noise level rose until Chancellor Mordan struck his ceremonial staff against the floor 3 times, a signal for immediate silence. What military assets do we currently have available? Mordan asked, though everyone in the room already knew the answer would be insufficient. A holographic display materialized showing the current positions of all Council military forces. The combined fleets of 47 worlds represented the largest military force in galactic history, yet the projections showed it would not be enough. The Void Swarm had grown during its long sleep in the darkness between galaxies, and now returned with capabilities that exceeded their ancient legends. We need additional support, declared Ambassador Yixtal of the Signian Empire, her crystalline form shimmering with agitation. What about the newer species? Those who have not yet achieved full council membership but possess significant military capabilities? Several delegates nodded in agreement, but Chancellor Mordan's expression grew troubled. The question of newer species always led to one particular group that made the entire council uncomfortable. They were a young species from a small yellow star system, aggressive and unpredictable in ways that violated every standard of civilized warfare. You mean the humans? Mordan said quietly, and immediately the chamber's atmosphere changed. The humans of Sol 3 had been discovered only 50 years earlier, and their rapid technological advancement had been both impressive and deeply concerning. They had developed faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, and defensive systems in a fraction of the time it had taken most species. However, their military tactics were considered barbaric by galactic standards. where other species engaged in warfare with calculated precision and adherence to ancient protocols, humans fought with desperate creativity and complete disregard for established rules. They used kinetic weapons when energy shields were standard, employed biological warfare when such methods were considered primitive, and showed a willingness to sacrifice themselves in ways that other species found incomprehensible. "The humans are too unpredictable," stated Ambassador Felnoon of the Andromedian Collective. "Their combat methods violate 17 different articles of the Galactic Warfare Convention. We voted 3 cycles ago to restrict their involvement in major military operations." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The restriction had been implemented after humans had ended a mining dispute by ramming an asteroid into an enemy base, killing thousands but ending the conflict in minutes rather than the projected years of negotiation. The action had been effective but had horrified the other species with its casual brutality. In the observation gallery reserved for non-voting members, Commander Jake Sullivan of the Human Diplomatic Corps listened through his translation device. His jaw clenched as he heard his species described as too violent and unpredictable to be trusted with defending the galaxy. Jake had fought in 3 different conflicts since first contact, and he knew what humans were capable of when properly motivated. The restrictions on human military involvement had been presented as a temporary measure to allow for better integration of human forces with established galactic protocols. In reality, everyone knew it was because the other species were afraid of what humanity might do if given unlimited access to galactic military resources. "Then we face this threat with our current allied forces," Chancellor Mordan declared, his voice carrying finality. "All available Council fleets will be mobilized for defensive operations. Evacuation procedures will be implemented for Outer Rim colonies. No human involvement will be authorized. That decision is final." The session continued for several more hours as military commanders presented defensive strategies and evacuation timelines. Jake listened to every word, taking notes on his personal device while maintaining the neutral expression expected from an observer. The plans being discussed were sound by galactic standards, but Jake could already see the flaws that would doom them to failure. The Void Swarm had survived and grown strong, specifically because it could adapt to conventional galactic warfare. What the galaxy needed was something the Swarm had never encountered before, something so unconventional that adaptation would be impossible. What they needed were humans, but the Council had just forbidden exactly that. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Jake remained in his seat, watching Chancellor Mordan speak quietly with his military advisors. The Chancellor's expression showed the weight of command and the knowledge that his decision might have just doomed billions of sentient beings to death. Jake activated his personal communicator, sending an encrypted message to Earth Command. The message was simple and direct, containing only the essential facts about the approaching threat and the Council's decision to exclude human involvement. He knew that somewhere in the depths of human military intelligence, analysts were already working on unofficial solutions to officially forbidden problems. The galaxy might not want human help, but Jake suspected that some individuals within the member species would soon realize that conventional solutions would not be enough to stop an unconventional enemy. When that moment came, they would need to know how to contact the one species that specialized in impossible solutions to hopeless situations. As Jake left the council chambers, he noticed Ambassador Kethvar watching him from across the corridor. The Zelani commander had worked with human forces during previous conflicts and understood their capabilities better than most council members. The look they exchanged lasted only a moment, but it carried volumes of unspoken communication. The official war against the Void Swarm would be fought according to galactic protocols and would likely end in defeat. But Jake suspected that an unofficial war was about to begin, one that would be fought by those brave enough to ignore orders and desperate enough to try anything that might work. The galaxy had been warned about the approaching darkness, and the Council had chosen to face it with conventional wisdom and established protocols. But in the shadows of official policy, other conversations were already beginning. Conversations that would determine whether the galaxy survived or... 3 weeks had passed since the Galactic Council made their decision to exclude human forces from the coming war against the Void Swarm. During those weeks, Outer Rim colonies had sent increasingly desperate messages, as long-range sensors detected the approaching enemy fleet. The void swarm was moving faster than projected, consuming stellar matter and growing stronger with each passing day. On the forgotten moon of Zerath Prime, deep in neutral space where no government claimed authority, an unauthorized meeting was about to take place. The location had been chosen carefully by those who understood the necessity of keeping certain conversations away from official channels and surveillance networks. Captain Lisa Morgan piloted her stealth frigate, Defiant, through the asteroid field that surrounded the barren moon. The ship's advanced cloaking systems made it virtually invisible to standard detection methods, a technology that humans had developed specifically for situations where official approval was impossible to obtain. Lisa had served in 3 different conflicts since first contact with galactic civilization, and she understood that sometimes the most important missions were the ones that never appeared in official records. Beside her in the cramped cockpit sat Colonel Rick Hayes, a grizzled veteran of planetary assault operations who specialized in unconventional warfare tactics. Rick had requested reassignment to this mission, specifically because he knew that conventional galactic military doctrine would fail against an enemy, like the Void Swarm. His weathered face showed the scars of battles fought in ways that made other species uncomfortable, but his tactical record spoke for itself. Behind them, Dr. Amanda Foster reviewed data files on her portable research station. As humanity's leading expert on xenobiological warfare, Amanda had spent years studying how Earth organisms might interact with alien life forms. Her research had been considered too dangerous by some human officials and too primitive by galactic scientists, but recent events had made her expertise suddenly valuable. The Defiant settled into orbit around Zerath Prime, and Lisa activated the communication systems to announce their arrival. Within minutes, response signals came from 3 different locations on the moon's surface. The meeting that was about to take place represented a gathering of individuals who had decided that following orders was less important than preventing galactic extinction. Lisa, Rick, and Amanda took a shuttle down to the designated coordinates, landing at a research facility that had been abandoned years earlier during territorial disputes between competing mining companies. The facility still maintained life support systems and provided enough shelter for a clandestine gathering of desperate military leaders. Inside the main conference room, they found Ambassador Kethvar waiting with a small group of allies who shared his conviction that official channels would lead to disaster. The Zilani commander looked older than he had 3 weeks earlier, the weight of watching outer colonies fall to the void swarm showing clearly in his posture and expression. Standing beside Kethvar were Commander Zixtal of the Traxian Defense Force and Captain Morgeth from the Andromedan Scout Fleet. Both officers represented species that had previously worked with human forces and understood their capabilities better than most galactic leaders. They had also both been ordered by their respective governments to avoid any contact with human military personnel. Captain Morgan, Kethvar said as the humans entered the conference room, "Thank you for accepting this invitation despite the risks involved." Lisa studied the assembled alien officers, noting the tension in their movements and the careful way they avoided looking directly at the recording devices they had presumably disabled before the meeting began. "You said this was about the Void Swarm. Our intelligence suggests they're moving faster than your public reports indicate." Commander Zixtal activated a holographic display showing current Void Swarm positions based on classified military intelligence. The display revealed a situation far worse than anything the Galactic Council had admitted publicly. 17 outer rim colonies had already gone silent, and the approaching enemy fleet was larger than initial estimates by several orders of magnitude. "The official defensive strategy assumes we have 6 months to prepare," Zixtal explained, her crystalline features reflecting the harsh light from the holographic display. "Based on current movement patterns, we have perhaps 6 weeks before they reach core systems with significant populations." Rick Hayes studied the tactical information with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades planning military operations. "Your conventional fleets are positioned to fight a traditional enemy using established protocols. But this void swarm adapts to whatever you throw at it. Energy weapons become useless after first contact, and they absorb shield technology to strengthen their own defenses." Dr. Foster leaned forward to examine biological data that had been collected from the few encounters with void swarm scouts. "These organisms are unlike anything in our databases. They're part biological, part technological, with adaptive capabilities that exceed anything we've previously encountered. They learn from each engagement and modify their responses accordingly. Captain Morgeth spoke for the first time since the humans had arrived, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed the enemy firsthand. I commanded the scout fleet that made first contact with a Void Swarm advance unit. We engaged them with standard energy weapons and achieved initial success. Within hours, they had adapted complete immunity to our weapons and destroyed half my fleet using our own technology against us. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of that statement. If the Void Swarm could adapt to galactic technology so quickly, then conventional warfare was indeed hopeless. The enemy had survived for thousands of years specifically because it could learn and counter any strategy based on established protocols. So what are you proposing? Lisa asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Kethvar activated another display, this one showing potential operational zones where small units might engage the enemy without official oversight or support from their respective governments. We need tactics the Void Swarm has never encountered, methods so unconventional that adaptation becomes impossible because there are no consistent patterns to learn. You're talking about human military doctrine, Rick said with a slight smile. The same methods your council voted to restrict because they're too unpredictable and violent. Exactly, Kethvar replied. Your species fights wars in ways that violate every standard of civilized combat. But that might be precisely what we need against an enemy that learns from civilized approaches. Dr. Foster pulled up her research files on biological warfare applications. I've been studying potential vulnerabilities in organisms that combine biological and technological components. Earth bacteria and viruses might affect them in ways they cannot predict or counter because they've never encountered terrestrial biology. The group spent the next several hours developing what they decided to call Operation Blackout, a covert intervention that would utilize human military capabilities while maintaining plausible deniability for all participating governments. The operation would be disguised as civilian merchant activity, with human ships carrying modified cargo containers that actually contained military equipment and personnel. Lisa would command a mixed fleet of human vessels and alien ships whose captains were willing to risk court-martial for the chance to save their species. Rick would coordinate ground operations using human infantry tactics that emphasized mobility, unpredictability, and the use of primitive weapons that the Void Swarm would have no experience countering. The biggest challenge will be maintaining operational security, Lisa observed, as they finalized preliminary plans. If our governments discover this alliance, we'll all face charges of treason or violation of military orders. Commander Zixtal nodded grimly. My government has already issued specific orders forbidding any cooperation with human forces. The penalty for disobedience is exile from Traxian space and loss of citizenship. The Council will not understand our actions until after we succeed, Kethvar added. If we succeed. If we fail, we'll be remembered as the officers who ignored orders and made the situation worse. Rick Hayes stood up and walked to the display showing Void Swarm positions. Sometimes the right choice isn't the legal choice. My experience with impossible situations is that conventional solutions usually fail because they're based on conventional thinking. This enemy has survived for thousands of years by defeating conventional approaches. Dr. Foster closed her research files and looked around the room at the assembled officers who were preparing to risk everything on an unauthorized mission. We'll need to establish secure communication channels and supply lines that can't be traced back to our official command structures. This operation will have to be completely self-sufficient. As the meeting concluded, each participant understood that they were crossing a line from which there might be no return. They were choosing to disobey direct orders from their respective governments in order to pursue a strategy that their leaders had specifically forbidden. Kethvar grasped Lisa's shoulder as they prepared to leave, his three-fingered hand conveying both gratitude and concern. Captain Morgan, if the Council discovers the mining world of Zirion 7 had been a peaceful industrial colony for over 200 years, its 3 million inhabitants working the rich mineral deposits that supplied raw materials to dozens of nearby systems. Now the planet's surface burned with the green fire of Void Swarm bioships that had established their first major foothold in Council space. Captain Lisa Morgan watched the tactical displays aboard her command ship as Galactic Council forces attempted their third bombardment run against the swarm positions. The alien fleet maintained proper formation spacing and used coordinated energy weapon strikes exactly as specified in standard military doctrine. For the third time, their weapons proved completely ineffective against enemies that had already adapted to energy-based attacks. They're following the same patterns they used against the advanced scouts, Colonel Rick Hayes observed from his position at the tactical station. The swarm learned from those encounters and now treats energy weapons like a feeding source rather than a threat. Lisa activated the secure communication channel that connected her ship to the mixed human and alien vessels that comprised Operation Blackout Strike Force. The official Council fleet had no idea that unauthorized reinforcements were operating in the same system. Hidden among the asteroid fields and debris clouds that surrounded Xerion 7. All units, this is Defiant Actual, Lisa transmitted using encryption codes that would be undetectable to Council monitoring systems. Begin approach from Vector 77 Alpha. Remember, we're officially not here and this engagement never happened. The human ships moved through the asteroid belt with practiced stealth. Their crews trained in tactics that other species considered too risky or unpredictable for regular military use. Instead of maintaining formation, each vessel followed an independent approach route designed to confuse enemy tracking systems and prevent coordinated defensive responses. Rick Hayes prepared his ground assault teams for deployment while studying intelligence reports about void swarm creature behavior. The enemy organisms were partially biological, which meant they might be vulnerable to methods that purely technological enemies could easily counter. His soldiers carried weapons that the Galactic Council had banned from civilized warfare centuries ago. Team leaders, confirm equipment status. Rick transmitted to his unit commanders scattered across 6 different ships. Chemical explosives, kinetic weapons, and incendiary devices are authorized for unrestricted use. Remember that these creatures adapt to energy weapons, but have never encountered primitive combustion technology. Dr. Amanda Foster worked frantically in her mobile laboratory, preparing biological weapons based on modified Earth bacteria that she hoped would prove effective against the swarm's organic components. Her research had been conducted in secret for months, using samples obtained through unofficial channels and methods that violated several galactic treaties regarding biological warfare. The organisms show vulnerability to necrotizing bacteria at the cellular level, Amanda reported to Lisa over the secure channel. I've modified strains of flesh-eating bacteria to target their specific biosignatures. It should spread through their organic components faster than they can regenerate or adapt. The first phase of the attack began when human ships emerged from the asteroid belt using ramming tactics that horrified the watching Zelani commanders. Instead of engaging at long range with energy weapons, the human vessels approached at high speed and launched modified cargo, containers filled with radioactive mining waste, directly into swarm breeding pools. The void swarm creatures had no experience with kinetic bombardment using contaminated materials. Their adaptive systems were designed to counter sophisticated energy weapons and technological attacks, not primitive physical impacts delivered by vessels willing to risk collision damage for tactical advantage. Direct hits on 3 breeding facilities, reported Commander Bill Jackson from the human destroyer Resilient. The radioactive contamination is spreading through their organic matrix faster than their regeneration systems can compensate. Colonel Hayes launched his ground assault using drop pods that delivered his soldiers directly into swarm-controlled territory without the extended approach phases that allowed enemies time to adapt their defenses. The human infantry carried flamethrowers, chemical explosives, and kinetic weapons that fired solid projectiles instead of energy bolts. The first swarm creatures that encountered human ground forces discovered that their adaptive defenses were completely useless against weapons that operated on primitive physical principles. Energy shields designed to absorb and redirect sophisticated attacks offered no protection against burning chemicals or high-velocity metal projectiles. The flamethrowers are incredibly effective, Hayes reported as his soldiers advanced through swarm positions that had been considered impregnable by Council forces. These creatures can adapt to energy-based attacks, but they have no defense against direct thermal damage at the molecular level. Kethvar monitored the engagement from his flagship, recording everything for later analysis while maintaining his official position with the Council fleet. The human tactics were achieving results that conventional warfare had failed to produce. But they came at a terrible cost in casualties and equipment. The humans are suffering losses at nearly 5 times our normal rate. Kethvar reported to his staff officers, his voice filled with amazement. But their tactical effectiveness is beyond anything we've achieved against these creatures. Lisa coordinated the space-based portion of the assault while watching her ships take damage that would have forced conventional forces to withdraw. Human vessels used their armor plating and redundant systems to absorb punishment that would disable more advanced ships, continuing to fight even after sustaining what other species would consider crippling damage. The human destroyer. Valiant rammed directly into a swarm bioship after its weapon systems were disabled, detonating its reactor core in a controlled explosion that destroyed both vessels. The sacrifice eliminated a major swarm command unit and disrupted enemy coordination across the entire battlefield. Dr. Foster's biological weapons proved devastatingly effective when deployed directly against swarm organic components. Her modified bacteria spread through enemy positions like wildfire, causing massive system failures in creatures that had no immunity to Earth-based biological agents. The bacterial infection is cascading through their entire bio-network, Amanda reported excitedly. Their adaptive systems can't develop immunity fast enough because the bacteria are attacking at the cellular level using mechanisms they've never encountered. The battle for Zarian 7 lasted 18 hours, with human forces maintaining continuous pressure against an enemy that found itself unable to adapt to tactics it had never experienced. When the last swarm positions finally fell, the planet's surface was scarred by weapons and methods that violated every principle of civilized galactic warfare. Rick Hayes stood among the wreckage of what had been the primary swarm command center, his uniform stained with chemicals and debris from weapons that other species refused to use. Around him, human soldiers tended to wounded comrades while alien observers struggled to comprehend what they had witnessed. Colonel Hayes, came a transmission from Kethvar's flagship. The Council fleet is requesting a full report on the weapons and tactics used in this engagement. Rick smiled grimly as he surveyed the battlefield that conventional forces had been unable to clear in 3 weeks of fighting. Tell them we used fire, explosives, and bullets, same as humans have been using for thousands of years. The victory at Zarian 7 marked the first major defeat of Void Swarm forces since their return to the galaxy, but it also created new problems for the Secret Alliance. News of the successful engagement spread through underground channels, reaching other worlds that were facing swarm attacks and desperately seeking alternatives to failed conventional strategies. Within days, Lisa began receiving encrypted messages from alien commanders throughout Council space, all requesting human assistance for their own battles against the Void Swarm. Each request came with the same caveat that official channels remained closed and any assistance would have to be provided through unofficial means. We're receiving requests for support from 14 different systems, Lisa reported to her command staff. Our current forces can't possibly cover that many simultaneous operations. Rick Hayes studied the tactical requirements for expanding Operation Blackout to multiple theaters of operation. We'll need to train alien forces in human combat techniques. Most species can learn to use our weapons and tactics if they're willing to abandon their traditional approaches to warfare. Dr. Foster had already begun developing portable laboratories that could be deployed to other worlds, allowing local forces to produce biological weapons based on her research. The bacterial agents can be cultivated using local resources on most inhabited worlds. We just need to provide the initial cultures and production techniques. The success at Zarian 7 had proven that human methods could defeat the Void Swarm, but it had also demonstrated the enormous cost in human lives and equipment. Lisa knew that expanding operations to multiple systems would require resources and personnel that Operation Blackout did not license. High Chancellor Mordan stood in his private chambers aboard the massive Council flagship, staring at battle reports that made absolutely no sense according to everything he understood about military strategy and Void Swarm capabilities. The data screen showed impossible results from 17 different star systems where swarm forces had been not just defeated but completely eliminated using methods that violated every principle of modern galactic warfare. His aide Slicks entered the chamber carrying additional intelligence reports, his reptilian features showing the nervous tension that had gripped the entire Council leadership since news of the victories began arriving. The pattern of defeat suggested coordination and tactical planning that should have been impossible under current Council military doctrine. "Sir, the analysis teams have completed their review of the engagement recordings," Slicks reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "The weapon signatures and tactical patterns are consistent across all battle zones, but they do not match any technology in our databases." Mordan activated the main display screen, which showed tactical recordings from the battle at Zarian 7, where swarm forces had been eliminated for the first time since their return to the galaxy. The footage revealed combat methods that seemed primitive compared to standard galactic military technology, yet they had achieved results that sophisticated energy weapons could not match. These recordings show the use of chemical incendiary weapons, kinetic projectile systems, and biological warfare agents, Mordan observed, his voice filled with growing concern. Such methods were banned by the Galactic Warfare Convention over 300 years ago. Slicks manipulated the controls to display additional battle recordings from other systems where similar victories had occurred. "Sir, we have detected human biosignatures at all 17 engagement sites. The tactical patterns match known human military doctrine from their pre-contact conflicts." The revelation hit Mordan like a physical blow. The Council had specifically voted to exclude human forces from military operations against the Void Swarm. Yet somehow humans were not only involved, but appeared to be leading successful operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. "Show me the communication intercepts," Mordan commanded, though he already suspected what they would reveal. The display changed to show encrypted transmission patterns that had been detected during the battle periods. The encryption methods were sophisticated enough to prevent decoding, but the transmission frequencies and routing protocols matched those used by human military communication systems. The evidence suggests extensive human involvement in all successful anti-swarm operations. Slicks continued, his voice growing more strained. Furthermore, these operations appear to be coordinated with several Council member species whose commanders have been operating without official authorization. Mordan felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a crushing burden. The humans had been excluded from military operations specifically because their methods were considered too dangerous and unpredictable for civilized warfare. Yet those same dangerous methods had achieved the only significant victories against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. "Identify all Council officers who have had previous contact with human military personnel," Mordan ordered. "Begin immediate investigations into their recent activities and communications." Within hours, security teams had arrested Ambassador Cathvar, along with dozens of other Council officers who had served in joint operations with human forces during previous conflicts. The interrogations revealed the existence of Operation Blackout, a covert alliance that had been operating in direct violation of Council orders for over 6 weeks. On Earth, President Helen Carter faced her own crisis as reports of unauthorized military operations reached the Sol system through intelligence channels that had been monitoring human fleet movements. The scale of the operations far exceeded anything that had been officially authorized by Earth Command or the World Council. General Paul Stevens stood before an emergency session of the World Security Council, defending actions that he had not authorized but could not condemn given their success in saving alien civilizations from extinction. The political implications were staggering, as Earth faced potential economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation from the Galactic Council. 17 billion sentient beings would be dead without our intervention, Stevens argued, his weathered face showing the strain of defending subordinates who had acted without orders. "Our forces disobeyed official policy, but they prevented genocide on a galactic scale." President Carter activated secure communication channels to contact Captain Lisa Morgan, whose fleet was currently engaged in operations against Void Swarm forces in the Andromeda sector. The conversation that followed would determine whether Earth supported or condemned the actions of its military personnel. "Captain Morgan," Carter began, her voice carrying the authority of global leadership, "you are operating in direct violation of orders from Earth Command and agreements with the Galactic Council. Explain your actions." Lisa's response came through with the background noise of active combat operations, her voice steady despite the obvious stress of commanding forces in battle. "Madam President, the Galactic Council's strategy was failing and billions of innocent beings were going to die. We had the capability to prevent that tragedy. So we acted. The communication was interrupted by weapons fire and explosion sounds as Lisa's forces engaged swarm units that had been preparing to attack a civilian colony. When the channel cleared, Lisa continued her report with the detached professionalism of a combat veteran. Our unconventional tactics are proving highly effective against enemies that can adapt to standard galactic military technology. The Void Swarm has never encountered human warfare methods, which makes their adaptive capabilities useless against our approaches. Carter found herself in the impossible position of having to choose between supporting actions that violated international agreements and condemning military personnel who were preventing galactic extinction. The political ramifications of either choice would reshape humanity's relationship with alien civilizations. Captain, Earth Command has received direct orders from the Galactic Council, demanding immediate withdrawal of all human forces from combat operations. You are to cease current activities and return to Sol system immediately. The pause that followed lasted long enough for Carter to hear additional weapons fire in the background, indicating that Lisa's forces were actively engaged with enemy units even during this conversation. When Lisa finally responded, her words carried the weight of command decisions made under impossible circumstances. Madam President, respectfully, we cannot comply with that order while civilian populations are under direct attack. We will complete our current mission objectives and then reassess the situation, based on enemy movements and allied support requirements. Colonel Rick Hayes had received similar communications from his superiors, ordering immediate cessation of ground combat operations and withdrawal from all forward positions. His response was delivered while coordinating artillery strikes against swarm breeding facilities that threatened 3 separate colony worlds. Command, this is Hayes Actual, he transmitted during a brief lull in combat operations. We are currently engaged in operations that will prevent the extinction of approximately 40 million civilian beings. Withdrawal at this time would constitute abandonment of mission-critical objectives. Dr. Amanda Foster faced her own challenges as Earth's scientific community learned about her unauthorized research into biological warfare applications. Her work had violated several international treaties regarding the development of biological weapons, yet it had proven essential to stopping an enemy that conventional weapons could not touch. The bacterial agents I developed specifically target void swarm organic components, Amanda explained during an emergency review session conducted via secure communication. Without these weapons, the swarm would have overrun 12 more star systems by now. The growing political crisis reached a breaking point when High Chancellor Mordun issued an ultimatum to Earth's government demanding immediate recall of all human military forces and formal apologies for violations of galactic law. The ultimatum included threats of economic sanctions and exclusion from galactic trade networks. President Carter convened an emergency cabinet meeting to discuss Earth's response to the ultimatum. The debate centered on whether humanity should abandon alien allies who had trusted them or risk diplomatic isolation by continuing unauthorized military operations. If we recall our forces now, the Void Swarm will resume their advance and consume every remaining colony world within months, General Stevens argued. Our people are the only thing standing between the galaxy and complete extinction. The Secretary of State presented the opposite viewpoint, emphasizing the long-term consequences of defying the Galactic Council's authority. If we continue these operations, Earth could be completely isolated from galactic civilization. No trade, no diplomatic relations, no access to technologies that our economy depends on. As the debate continued, Captain Lisa Morgan made her own decision about the conflicting orders she had received from multiple sources. Her next transmission to Earth Command carried a tone of finality that indicated she understood the massive structure that hung in the void between galaxies defied every understanding of engineering and biology that existed in known space. Captain Lisa Morgan stared at the tactical displays aboard her flagship as her combined fleet of human and alien vessels approached what intelligence reports had identified as the Void Swarm's primary nest. The construct spanned 3 entire solar systems, composed of consumed worlds and the remains of countless civilizations that had fallen to the swarm over thousands of years. Sensor readings indicate the structure is completely organic, reported Commander Bill Jackson from his position at the science station. It appears to be a single living organism that has grown to encompass multiple star systems by consuming stellar matter and planetary bodies. Lisa activated the fleet communication system to address the mixed force of human ships and alien vessels that had volunteered for what everyone understood might be a suicide mission. The political consequences of their actions no longer mattered if they could eliminate the source of the swarm threat permanently. All units, this is Fleet Actual, Lisa transmitted. Intelligence indicates that destroying the primary nest will send death signals to swarm forces throughout the galaxy and end their coordinated attacks. This is our chance to finish what we started. Colonel Rick Hayes prepared his ground assault teams for deployment onto the surface of the massive construct. Knowing that conventional assault tactics would be useless against an enemy structure that was itself a living organism, his soldiers carried the heaviest chemical and biological weapons that human military science could produce, along with nuclear devices that would be planted at key structural points. Team leaders, remember that we're fighting inside a single massive organism, Rick transmitted to his unit commanders. Every surface is potentially hostile, and the entire structure can adapt to our presence once it becomes aware of the threat we represent. Dr. Amanda Foster worked frantically in her mobile laboratory, preparing concentrated doses of her most effective biological agents for direct injection into the creature's nervous system. Her research had identified what appeared to be neural clusters distributed throughout the construct, and destroying them might disrupt the organism's ability to coordinate swarm forces across the galaxy. The assault began when human ships used ramming tactics to penetrate the construct's outer defensive layers, creating breaches through which ground forces could be deployed directly into the creature's internal structure. The approach was brutally direct and resulted in massive casualties, but it achieved tactical surprise that more sophisticated methods would have failed to accomplish. Penetration successful on multiple vectors, reported Captain Susan Clark from the destroyer Endurance as her ship buried itself deep in the construct's living tissue, deploying assault teams at neural cluster coordinates 7 through 12. Rick Hayes led his forces through corridors that pulsed with organic rhythms while walls that resembled living tissue attempted to close around them. The soldiers used flamethrowers and chemical weapons to burn their way deeper into the structure, following navigation data that Dr. Foster had compiled from her analysis of swarm biology. The creature began responding to the human assault with defensive measures that had never been documented in previous encounters with swarm forces. Organic walls secreted acidic compounds designed to dissolve intruders, while specialized defense organisms emerged from hidden chambers to attack the advancing human troops. The structure is adapting to our presence faster than expected, Hayes reported as his soldiers fought their way through increasingly hostile internal passages. But the biological weapons are still proving effective against its defensive systems. Dr. Foster's team reached the first major neural cluster after fighting through 3 kilometers of hostile, organic passages filled with defensive organisms that seemed designed specifically to counter human physiology. The cluster itself was a massive brain-like structure that pulsed with electrical activity connecting it to similar nodes throughout the construct. Neural Cluster Alpha is confirmed as a primary coordination node. Amanda transmitted as her team prepared biological weapons for direct injection into the creature's nervous system. Destroying this should disrupt swarm coordination across approximately 15 star systems. The injection of concentrated bacterial agents into the neural cluster produced immediate and dramatic results. The massive brain structure began convulsing as the biological weapons attacked its cellular components faster than its regeneration systems could compensate. Electrical activity throughout the local area dropped dramatically as the cluster's functions failed. Captain Lisa Morgan coordinated the space-based assault while watching her ships take devastating damage from the construct's defensive systems. The living structure had begun generating energy weapons from its own biological processes, creating threats that her fleet had never encountered and could barely counter with available technology. "We're losing ships faster than projected," Lisa reported to her command staff as the human destroyer. Courage was consumed by organic tendrils that erupted from the construct's surface. But the ground teams are achieving their objectives at multiple neural clusters. The battle continued for 18 hours as human forces pushed deeper into the construct while suffering casualties that would have forced any conventional military to retreat. Rick Hayes lost over 60% of his ground forces. But his remaining soldiers succeeded in planting nuclear devices at 7 major structural points, identified by Dr. Foster's research. All nuclear devices are in position and armed. Hayes reported from deep within the construct's central core region. Biological weapons have successfully destroyed 12 neural clusters, and the structure's coordination abilities are breaking down. Dr. Foster made the final push to reach what her analysis had identified as the primary control center, a massive brain complex that appeared to coordinate not just the construct itself but all swarm forces throughout the galaxy. Her team fought through the creature's strongest defenses to reach the chamber that housed the central intelligence. Primary neural center is confirmed. Amanda transmitted as her team prepared their most concentrated biological weapons for the final assault. This structure appears to be the source of all swarm coordination and intelligence. Destroying it should end the threat permanently. The injection of biological weapons into the primary neural center produced effects that exceeded all projections. The massive brain began dying so rapidly that the construct's basic life support systems failed within minutes. Emergency evacuation signals were sent to all human forces as the structure entered what appeared to be massive organ failure. Rick Hayes led the evacuation of surviving ground forces while the construct began collapsing around them. The death of the primary neural center was sending shockwaves through the living structure that threatened to tear apart the space-time fabric in the local area. All teams, immediate evacuation to pickup points, Hayes transmitted as sections of the construct began imploding. The entire structure is entering terminal collapse phase. Lisa coordinated the evacuation of surviving personnel while her remaining ships pulled back to safe distance from the dying construct. The massive organism was literally tearing itself apart as its biological systems failed in cascade patterns that spread throughout its entire 3-system span. The final moments of the battle were witnessed by long-range sensors throughout the galaxy as the Void Swarm's primary nest collapsed into a new nebula that would be visible from dozens of star systems. The death signals transmitted by the dying construct reached swarm forces across known space, causing them to cease their attacks and begin retreating toward the galactic rim. 3 months later, High Chancellor Morden stood before the assembled Galactic Council in chambers that had been redesigned to include human seating arrangements. The political crisis that had followed the unauthorized human intervention had been resolved by the simple fact that the intervention had saved galactic civilization from extinction. The Council hereby formally recognizes humanity as a full member species with voting rights and unrestricted military command authority. Morden announced to the assembled delegates, the previous restrictions on human involvement in military operations are permanently lifted. Captain Lisa Morgan, now bearing the rank of Admiral, stood beside Ambassador Cathvar as they accepted formal recognition from the species they had saved through their willingness to disobey orders. The ceremony was broadcast throughout human space, where it was watched by populations who had only recently learned of their military's secret war. "We didn't fight for recognition or political advancement," Lisa stated when asked to address the council. "We fought because preventing genocide was more important than following regulations." Cathvar had been pardoned for his role in organizing the unauthorized alliance, and his species had formally thanked humanity for their intervention. The Zalani commander now served as liaison between human military forces and the Council's defense establishment. "Your species saved not just our colonies but our entire way of life," Cathvar said during the formal recognition ceremony. "You ignored orders from